This series of videos will be 6 parts covering the 6 decades I've been collecting comic books from the 70s to the 2020s. And it's autobiographical in nature. And it's an answer to my kids' questions to me about what was it like collecting comic books when I was a kid and how did I get into pressing and cleaning comic books. And this is, really overdoing it. It's a much bigger story than, making it into a much bigger story than it needed to be. But I started taking some video as I was traveling different places around the country, around the world. And I'm just doing little tidbits here and there and developing the story over the last couple of years. And this is the output of it. I'm going to just release the first two decades, which will be the 70s and the 80s, while I'm still working on the 90s and the 2010s, or 90s and 2000s and the 2010s and the 2020s. And this will be that series. There will be not much information for those who want to learn how to press and clean comics. It's more of just, it's a story of how I got into this. And so if you find that enjoyable, then you'll like this video, or this series of videos. So I hope you do. And this is it. Take care. Bye-bye. Some people ask me sometimes, hey, Rick, how did you get started cleaning comic books? And I started in a Star Wars guys. In the late 70s, I used to take a magnifying glass to the cheapest guys, which were the stormtroopers, and I used to battle damage them, make them look, like they had some kind of action scarring or something to them to make them look a little different to increase their value. And I would trade those for better figures that I really wanted that were harder to get at the time. And I really had a good time doing it. I enjoyed it. I would paint them, do other stuff. So I was modifying these and trading them in the schoolyard, and I would trade them. And I didn't really like comic books yet. I wasn't really into them. But then that morphed into gluing rocks and pieces of my grandma's pantyhose to Spider-Man comics. To the Thing comics, I would glue these red rocks. And I even had a Star Wars comic book that I glued some of those sort of white packing peanuts to make it look like Hoth scene in 1980, I remember. And then someone told me, hey, you can't do that. You can't do that. These things are supposed to be in better shape than they started. And I thought, well, why don't I do this like the opposite way then? Why can't I just instead of marking them up, why don't I fix them? And I did the same thing everybody else thinks, which is to take the comic books and run an eraser on it, put it under some encyclopedias. And this was like 1980, I think, something. We didn't know what comic book grading was at the time. And then I would try to trade those to my friends for other stuff. Never thought about money, right? Everybody was into X-Men at that time, I remember. And so I would take these books and I would start fixing them for other people. And I was a kid. I was probably 9 or 10, and that's how that started. But why did I start collecting comic books at all? My Spider-Man. I read Legion of Superheroes as a kid, and Superboy. I really liked that a lot. And when I was 8. I called my dad at his work and said, "Hey, you want to come and let's skip school and go see Superman the movie," which was I think 1979. It was being re-released after its initial release and being re-released in 1979. I hadn't seen it yet. Really wanted to see it, and the weekend before I wanted to see this movie, my dad died in a car accident. I was actually waiting for him to pick me up for school one day, and he never showed up. And then he had died. He never came and got me. I stood outside and, I waited a long time for him to come, and he didn't come. So he had died in a tragic car accident. And after that, I didn't like Superman anymore. But that's when I stopped liking Justice League and Legion of Superheroes and Superboy. And I sort of stopped collecting comic books altogether until I found the Spider-Man and Hulk series of the Marvel comics. So when did I start collecting comic books? I started it was 197 was my first purchased Spider-Man of my own. But in the late 70s, I had spent the night at my friend Peter's house, and his brother had gone in the army and had left a bunch of comic books under his bed, and we read his Hulk and Spider-Man books that were from about 130 to 145 of Spider-Man. So right post Gwen Stacy, just barely post Punisher, but before he and Mary Jane were in item. And that was the really good Ross Andrew art that I loved back at that time. And it was just some of my favorite writing and artwork of them all. And I really fell in love with it. Fell in love with the books, I fell in love with the stories, and I said, I really got to collect these things. And I took to heart the guy's advice who had told me to, you know, fix them up. I started putting them under encyclopedias and stuff. And that was the beginning, as they say, of a beautiful friendship, right?